This is News from the Water, and I am Peter Underwood. Body cameras plan meets with mixed reception. The tragic killing of Clive Porter on the towpath at Aylesbury earlier this year seems to be directly linked to Canal and River Trust's decision to introduce body cameras for its customer service workers on the towpath, initially in London and then across the country. Clive Porter was a former police officer who worked for CRT as a boat licence checker and was killed in an altercation. A man has been charged with his murder. CRT says the cameras are for its customer service employees whose role includes day-to-day interaction with those on the towpath. Initially, they'll be used daily by its boat licensed customer support team in London, and the Trust says this is a response to increased concerns about the potential for confrontation, abuse or harm whilst conducting their work. They don't provide any evidence to suggest there's been any increase in threats or violence to their staff. They do, however, attempt to imply that they're necessary for interacting with towpath visitors, assisting boaters, and when issuing notices or other written communications. Now, it's worth bearing in mind, of course, that CRT has just expanded its terms and conditions to allow them to take action against anyone who abuses or threatens their staff. And they claim the use of body-worn cameras will now provide legally admissible evidence if they need to act against those who abuse or threaten CRT colleagues or indeed CRT customers. Now, whilst the Trust admits instances of poor behaviour are rare, it claims they're on the increase. Of course, the Trust has a legal responsibility to ensure the safety of its employees, and it says offenders will be dealt with robustly and the Trust will seek to bring criminal proceedings against those responsible where necessary. Now, national publicity about the move has encouraged a debate among boaters, with many expressing their sadness about a distinct change of atmosphere on the towpath, whilst others emphasise that nobody should feel unsafe at work, quite correctly. Others saw it as a failure by CRT to effectively communicate with boaters and to train their staff, and of course as a knee-jerk reaction to a very unfortunate but isolated incident. They pointed out that body cameras may serve only to create a more adversarial situation, and it's easy to see boaters making a point of filming every interaction with CRT staff so that they too have evidence if allegations are made. One contributor to the Facebook debate said, "I record every encounter with CRT after 6 years ago reporting an aggressive member of their staff." All a bit sad. Customer service frustration. Like many other waterways, the Rochdale Canal has been closed in various locations for much of this summer, with broken locks and particularly low water a regular feature of life for those who boat there. In fact, it's reached the point where complaints from local boaters are apparently no longer welcome by CRT's Yorkshire region, despite their failure to make the canal usable for any length of time. The boaters complain that despite being grounded in one area for more than 30 days this year, they've been given misleading information, action's been promised that has not been taken, and CRT has now taken to complaining about multiple contacts from individual boaters. One points out that the volume of contacts would be considerably reduced if he received replies, and that CRT seemed to have no appreciation of the difficulties of living on a boat listing at a 45-degree angle. Now, he was told by CRT's boating and customer service manager, Eve Bucock.
Occasionally, the behavior or actions of individuals using our service makes it very difficult for us to deal with their contact. In a small number of cases, the actions of an individual become so frequent or unreasonable that the demand takes up an excessive amount of staff time, and in so doing disadvantages other customers and prevents their own correspondence from being dealt with quickly. Your contact with the Trust over this particular matter has reached this stage, and I am writing to ask you to refrain from contacting us about these matters again.
Which doesn't seem a friendly way of dealing with customers who complain about repeated failings of yours. Perhaps Miss Bocock thinks problems don't exist if she isn't obliged to hear about them. Do you think? Or maybe the next stage is a personal visit with a body camera. Accountability lacking. Now, the twisting and turning to avoid being held responsible for its actions is not limited to the regional staff of Canal and River Trust. It extends to the very top of the organisation, as events continue to prove. The National Bargee Travellers Association has now been effectively blocked by the expensive legal team headed by Tom Deards in taking the Trust to court to challenge the most recent draconian and poorly drafted terms and conditions. Now, those are what CRT attempts to use instead of the law when it wants to remove boaters from its waters. So, quite important. But the NBTA will be unable to take the case any further itself because CRT has found a little loophole that says, as the NBTA is an unincorporated association, it can demand a security deposit against any court costs CRT may incur. The Trust wants individual boaters who will be affected by the new terms and conditions to join the NBTA in the case, because if those individuals qualify for legal aid, CRT's costs would be covered. Now, the NBTA is seeking volunteers, but the likeliest outcome is that the case will be kept out of the courts, despite legal advice suggesting it had a good chance of resulting in CRT being forced to change its T's and C's again. Then there's the National Association of Boat Owners' efforts to stop the Trust selling off our canal heritage. A Freedom of Information request asking how many listed buildings have already been solved was denied, as we heard some months ago. I mean, of course, seasoned boaters know and they could easily compile a list of exceptional buildings that have been already sold off. And now an attempt to refer CRT to the Charity Commissioners for failing to meet its legal objective to preserve the heritage has been turned down by the Charity Commissioners. Now, that decision came despite the shameful reality that the campaign group Save Britain's Heritage felt it could add the iconic Braunston Stophouse to its at-risk register. CRT are tasked under Section 2.2 of their charitable objectives and also under the DEFRA grant agreement with conserving the UK's canal heritage for the future, not selling it all off to the highest bidder, as seems to have been the case. However, apparently the Charity Commission has said,
on this occasion, having assessed the concerns against our risk framework, we will not be contacting the charity. It is important to note that your concerns will remain on the charity's record and will inform future decisions should further information be received.
Wow, hope of a sort. But ways of holding CRT to account are few and far between, and the CRT Ombudsman has done nothing to give voters any faith in her impartiality. Despite that, inquiries to the Ombudsman are at their highest for 8 years, which may be a reflection of people's frustrations with CRT. But my colleague Alan Richards is still a month on pursuing a complaint against the Ombudsman for misleading advice and attempting to prevent a complaint about CRT bosses falsifying annual reports being considered. And he's contacted the chair of the Ombudsman Committee, Karen MacArthur. He's asking her to confirm that his complaint is eligible for investigation under the rules of the scheme, or to provide him with the rule that prevents it. Something the Ombudsman herself failed to do. He's also informed her that he's made a further complaint to CRT regarding falsification of information filed with the Charity Commission. This relates to annual returns rather than the annual reports they've already owned up to. CRT itself didn't respond within the normal legal timescale, so that complaint too is now with the Charity Commission, and the waves of unrest are washing against CRT's defences. Will those defences hold, at least until a decision is made on future government grants? Who knows? Social media wash. Meanwhile, the greenwashing of our waterways continues. While CRT studiously avoids being held to account for doing its real job of keeping the rivers and canals functioning as navigations, the number of closures hit a high of 19 a day this year. It pumps out social media messages focused on and around its well-being message. It wants this government to continue funding on the basis that waterways are vital to the health and well-being of the towpath walkers and cyclists. And we get lots of videos on social media encouraging us to take nature surveys or volunteer to look after the fragile canal system. Even if it all works, some of the figures being bandied about by the consultants bought in by DEFRA won't be sufficient to keep the system navigable for the ever-increasing numbers of boats and holidaymakers. So it may well be flogging a dead horse. Well, that's it for this week. Thanks for listening. See you again soon.
We need video and photos of all aspects of the waterways. Email files to peterunderwood2@gmail.com with your name and a brief description of it and where and when it was shot.